Hey, it's Jesse Coy from Coaching Distance. And today's talk is about one of my favorite running books, Winning Running by Bill Dellinger. Bill Dellinger was a coach at the University of Oregon. He was the distance coach, Bill Bowerman being the head coach. And Bill Dellinger coached during the time Prefontaine was a runner at the University of Oregon. And this book is kind of about the Oregon system. So the first part of the book goes through Dellinger talking about kind of his theory on training, things that he thinks about that make athletes successful. And then a big chunk of the book is actual workouts. So Prefontaine's full training plan is in there, 1972 when he ran the 5K at the Olympics. If you've seen the movies Prefontaine or Without Limits, you'll know what this is talking about. I think even kids nowadays don't watch those movies as much. I grew up running high school and college in the late 90s, 2000s. So everybody was watching Prefontaine. And I don't know if that's such a thing anymore. I just got back from the Classic also, which was an awesome meet just to watch everybody run. Got to also see a high schooler, Ellery Lincoln, compete. Her coach, Eric Detman, will be the July webinar presenter talking about training. We've had Eric on before where he talked about his teams and kind of building culture and things like that. But this one will be more about training, so I'm excited to hear that. But today let's get into this book, Winning Running, the Oregon System, a mental and physical approach to competitive running. And again, this is by Bill Dellinger. Try to find this book if you can. There obviously it's out of print, not many copies floating around, but I did see on Amazon there was a couple in the 30s, which is a bargain if you can snatch that up. Otherwise, it gets into like $200 and $300 for copies of these. My copy, I'll probably keep forever, although I did just buy a hardcover off eBay a couple days ago. So I'll have a couple copies of this. But for the time being, let's talk about this book. Bill Dellinger, Winning Running, Five Principles. One of the first things he talks about in the book are these five principles that he has as a coach when he's putting together training, kind of five principles, somewhat for athletes too, but mainly for coaches. So he talks about moderation, the first one. The second one, progression. The third one, adaptability. Fourth one, variation. And then the fifth one, callousing effect. And I'll go through each of these. I'll pull just a short amount of text from the book on each one of these principles. And then I will show you some examples of how I use these with my own distance kids and cross country kids. So, moderation. Now, this piece comes straight out of the book. Bill Dellinger's talking about himself and how he was trying to make the Olympic team in the 5,000 for Tokyo in 1964. September 1963, I decided to make a comeback after a 3-year layoff. My goal is to make the Olympic team in the 5,000 meters for the Tokyo Olympics of 1964. The popular concept at that time was that running 120 miles a week. So keep in mind also, this is me talking, not Dellinger. This was like coming off of Lydiard's success with athletes where the main thing you did was you ran a lot. Now, Lydiard also was one of the first coaches to use periodization, like doing different types of training in different times of the year. But one of the main things was running a lot. So Dellinger says the popular concept at the time was that running 120 miles a week was the key to success. I started out on a 120-mile-a-week program and lasted about 8 weeks. Even though I was tired, I found myself running 17 miles a day simply to get in my mileage. I eventually reached a point where I was unable to train because of illness brought about by the continued fatigue. So his point of view on this is running a ton, 160 miles a week, and taking a step back and thinking about, hey, we need a little moderation here. Like I'm trying to make the Olympics and 120 miles a week. Like I'm not going to survive off of this. So one of his principles was moderation. And just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. If you coach high school, you'll always have kids wanting to do more of whatever it is. Now, One of the things I like to think about is when talking about high school kids, I want them to see, like, for example, I want you to see how good you can get off of 40 miles a week before you go to 50. Could that athlete run 50 miles a week as maybe, a freshman? Probably. But let's see how good you can get off 40 miles a week and then have that extra 10 miles in the bag where we can add that and then get even better. So just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. In talking about moderation. The third thing I think about is this: yearly mileage is way more important than weekly mileage. So let's take this maybe freshman boy who's motivated and talented. Let's see if we can spend a year at 40 miles a week, 48 weeks of running 40 miles a week. I'm not going to do the math on this because I don't have anything in front of me to do the math with, but I'll take a consistent 48 weeks of 40 miles per week over running 61 week, feeling sick, tired, hurt, your next week's 20, building back up 30, like that up and down. I would rather have a consistent 40 miles a week throughout the year. Now, I also just had a webinar where Coach Emma Dellinger talked about down weeks. I usually don't schedule down weeks because oftentimes with high school kids, those are just built into the season. Like you have a race coming up that's important, you may run a little bit less that week. You have weather that pops up, especially in the Midwest where I coach, then you may have to adjust things where you have a down week. Things come up that just build in down weeks. So I don't necessarily use those. So that being said, I'm always thinking about yearly mileage over weekly mileage. So we may run a little less, but we are probably more consistent. Now, Steve Magnus just posted this quote from Josh Kerr. Josh Kerr, outstanding middle distance runner, runs for the Brooks Beast. And he says this: I don't do crazy workouts or crazy mileage. I just don't miss days. Consistency is my biggest weapon. I'll break any athlete down with how consistent I'm going to be training wise and just getting the work done. And I really can't agree more with this. I love this quote. And that's how I think about training too, is I don't think you have to run the highest mileage of anybody that you're competing against, but if you can stack together week after week after week of consistent mileage, that number at the end of the year is probably going to be higher than someone who is over their head and running 60 miles a week, like I said before. Then they got to go down to 40 because something popped up. Okay. Consistency, like Josh Kerr says, is his biggest weapon, and I think is any runner's biggest weapon. All right. Dillinger's next principle he talks about progression. And progression, I think, is more important than periodization. So, periodization, like what times a year you do different workouts, how your plan looks, but progressing different workouts throughout the year. So, principle two, progression. This is Bill Dellinger writing in his book, Winning Running. At Oregon, the runners program begins in the middle of August with a progression pointed towards peaking in performance sometime the following June or July, depending on the individual's ability. And what he's talking about there is depending on if they make, USA championships, NCAA nationals, things like that. So some people may end sooner. Then he goes on, the individual's progression can be controlled by what I call date pace and goal pace. Now, these are two important things. Date pace, where you are currently, goal pace, where you want to be. And really, when you think about training, you're always trying to connect those two, get kids from where they are to where they want to be. And Dellinger writes, in most cases, the toughest part of training is holding back so that you'll not peak too soon. And this is where date pace and goal pace fit in. Now, especially in the summer, like you do want to push it. Like you do want to reach new mileage levels, to run some workouts maybe faster than you've gone before. But there is an art to holding people back a bit, knowing when the date of your goal races are so that you're not doing too much too fast too soon. So having a progressive plan is where goal pace and date pace fit in. This is a screenshot of the in-season 2026 cross-country plan, which will come out at the end of this week. For those of you who are a D crew member on coaching distance, it is free for you. Otherwise, normal civilians have to pay $39.99. Now, part of this plan goes off date pace. Part of it goes off goal pace. 1600, 800-meter work, which we sprinkle in throughout the year. Maybe a little more emphasis during the track season. That type of work is good to do at goal pace. It's shorter. You take a little longer breaks, but that work is fine to eat goal pace for that. This other threshold type work is great to use with date pace, the pace you currently are at. So if I'm a 5-minute miler, I would look on the chart and I want to do my runs, my aerobic, these threshold type runs, workouts aligned with my date pace. I don't want those to be too fast. My 1600-meter, 800-meter, my 100, 200-meter pace, 400-meter, that can be goal pace. That's fine. That's a good way to connect goal pace, like end of the year track goal pace, with what you're doing now. But that aerobic work, that threshold type work, that really needs to be at date pace, like your current fitness level. And like, I know this sounds wild, but like that's how you improve the most also, is optimal training. Adaptability. So Dellinger talks about adaptability. And actually love this example because it's the most adaptability I've probably ever seen in my life. So here Dellinger writes this. In 1957, I was in the Air Force and stationed at a remote radar site on the northern tip of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. It was 80 miles to the nearest town that had a track. So I had to adapt. I developed a method of doing intervals on the beach by counting my strides. I would count to myself each time my right foot touched the ground until I reached 10. Then I would put, now this is like wild. Like I would never be able to focus enough to do this. So then he goes, I would then put one finger out to keep track. So 10 strides, he puts out one finger to keep track. Or 10, his right foot hitting 10 times. Then he puts up one finger to keep track. I would continue this process for the equivalent of 12 fingers, estimating this to be approximately a 400. I would run up and down the stretch of beach, doing 220s, 330s, 440s, 660s, 880s, and 1320s by what I call the count system. I used this system for 8 months of training without ever stepping onto a track, never knowing exactly how far I was running or how fast. The first time I stepped onto a track the following spring for a test effort, so like a time trial, I ran a solo 4:05 mile. I went on that year to set the American records in the 1500 meter, 2 mile, 3 mile, and 5,000 meters. To this day, as a jogger, I find myself occasionally counting to myself as my right foot touches down. All right. So if Bill Dellinger can train on a beach by counting his right footsteps, and then just off of that training, running a 4:05 mile and then setting basically every American record from the 15 to the 5K, then I think we can be adaptable. I don't think there's any excuses, is what I should say. So, adaptability, how I think about it. And these are things like that I hear from kids sometimes. And we try to knock this down by preparing for it, having the confidence from doing this in practice. So some things I hear kids say is like, oh, I can't race in the morning. Oh, I can't do a nice race. So we want them to be able to race any time of day. So that means in practice, you may have to schedule some morning practices. Most kids are fine racing at night, but maybe sometimes you schedule evening races or evening workouts. Some kids, and especially in cross country, but it happens in track too, have certain courses that they think they can't race on. So you can combat this by building confidence in practice and running on different terrains, maybe even the same terrain that they'll race on. Something that also pops up is oftentimes kids think they can't handle certain types of races. Oh, I can't handle if it goes out fast. Can't handle if it goes out slow. Can't handle if it's a big kick. These are all things that we want to be adaptable to. So the best way to do this is in practice. Put them in situations that mimic these types of races. And then the last thing I'll say on adaptability is I think it's important to have a plan B for literally everything. So something comes up, automatically have a plan B for what to do. Our plan B for my team is whatever we would do on the run, and we assign everything in minutes, you just move that to the bike. Plan B on race days, we have a state meet that's 3 days long. And this year, our hotel being a 5 minute walk, we just walk back and forth to track. So plan B for us at this meet that's 3 days, and most kids have a lot of events. Plan B was no cool down, just walk back to the hotel. We tried to cool down after the first race and it was hot. We just scrapped that and said plan B. We were just walking back to the hotel, no cool down. And we did great, did just fine. Variation. I love variation. And I know if you, as you read this, hopefully you, or as you listen to this, as you listen to me read this, hopefully you come up with things that you can utilize and practice that will provide variation for your athletes. So this is a short clip from the book. Not only do workouts vary from individual to individual, but the same workout seldom is given twice. And I really like that. Like we will duplicate some workouts, but I like to have some variation, even, even if you're doing like 5 by 1K, maybe you do the same thing, but you switch what you add after it. Maybe you use different surfaces. I love variation. It is healthy to vary the pattern of running, not anticipating what is coming up the next week. Variation leads to mental freshness. And I think that's a super important concept there, that mental freshness, because most of our kids will run cross country, some sort of indoor and outdoor track. Like that's competing and training a lot. I mean, the whole year. So variation, I think, is underrated and super important. So here's a couple ways we use variation, or I use it with my teams. Location. We vary the location of our runs. So one of the runs we have where we do most of our long runs is a place called Victoria Lake Road. And it's it's off the beaten path a little bit. It's kind of a rough place to run. It's hilly. The surface isn't always great. But I like that variation from just always being on the bike path, where most of our runs are just on a bike path. So once a week, typically, or every other week, we'll head out, and it takes a little time to get there. It's still within our city limits, but we head out to Victoria Lake Road. We have a couple other locations we'll practice, Canyon Lake Park being one, and it's like a 1K loop that we can do fartlek training on. Founders Park is another place we have, and all of these require a little bit of driving. Sometimes we meet at the high school, and then sometimes we meet at our track at Sioux Park. So having different locations, I think, is important. And you can do kind of the same workouts at any type of place, which we'll talk about in a second. Multi-pace training, so having variation within your workouts, not always just running easy every day, not always just doing threshold training every day, but everything from all-out sprinting. So we'll use hill sprints, we'll use sprints on the track, flying 30s, to just running easy on a long run at Victoria Lake Road. So a variety of paces also, which if you have dug through any of these training plans on coaching distance, you'll quickly find out that each week has a variety of paces, structured to meet a goal, but has a variety of paces. Terrain can also be a way to use variation. So the track is one that's common. Sometimes that's all we have is a track and some roads to run on. But if you have hills, use hills. If you have different sidewalks, different roads, even just a fresh location is kind of nice sometimes. Use grass, use dirt if you have it. I know like with the new shoes technology, like I don't think it's important to run on grass or dirt for injury prevention, but like having those surfaces, especially in cross country, as something you train on can help you get used to your race surface. And then the last part is knowing what stimulus you're trying to target in a workout. So if you're trying to do a threshold workout, You don't always need to use a track. I know it's nice and measured, and the coach can stand there and watch everything, but you can also use fartlek training. So instead of doing 8 by 800 at 6 minute pace in 3 minutes, you could also do 8 by 3 on, 1 off anywhere in the entire world. You could use bike path. You could use a grass loop. You could use a dirt road. You could use anything. And you can use hills instead of doing repetitions on the track. You're going to get about the same purpose of your workout without the stress of having to look at a watch. So you don't always have to use the track. And I think we had a little like more injuries just because we use the track a lot. Like we maybe more than usual. And I like using the track. It's controlled, but variety is also good. The last thing Dellinger talks about, the callousing effect. And I'm going to read a little bit here, and you're probably going to have like 5 kids in your head that have experienced the same thing. Dellinger writes, in 1956, I decided, with urging from my coach, Bill Bowerman, to run the 5,000 meters rather than the 1,500 in our Olympic tryouts. I had won the NCAA championship in the mile in 1954 and was a runner-up to a classmate, Jim Bailey, in 1955. The mile was my favorite race, but I had to agree with Bowerman that I had a better chance of making our team in the 5,000. But what a callousing effect. That first 5,000 I ran in competition was the longest, hardest race I had ever run, simply because I was not calloused for that distance at that pace. I developed a severe stitch on the 10th lap and wasn't sure I could even finish. So we've all had kids that run a longer race, could be a shorter race, but usually a longer race for the first time. And it's tough. The first time someone runs a 2 mile is not going to be their best race. It's going to feel way faster than they thought. First time in a 5K cross country is not going to be their best race. So part of improving in various races is not always fitness. Sometimes it's just getting this callousing effect of being able to run the race how it's supposed to be run. And oftentimes it's more mental than physical. So a couple things you can do to help with callousing. Include all paces year round. Now, I'm not saying full-blown workouts at 800-meter pace or mile pace in June or July. I'm saying including spices of all paces year round. So if you're experienced with these coaching distance training plans, that is one of the things you'll notice, that every month of the year has something at 800, 1600 meter pace. Obviously, we're always working on the aerobic side. So you're always going to see paces near 5K pace and 10K, half marathon, etc. But that callousing, you can also think of that as adaptation, but that callousing effect, getting used to certain paces. Also, I think that goes along with this callousing effect is the number of races it takes to reach your best. Sometimes this is more for high school kids, like figuring out how to race a certain race. Has nothing to do with fitness, has all to do about just experience in these races. Now, I like to kind of rotate how we do races, like in track, like we're not going to do the same race every week. So oftentimes it does become difficult to like get enough races in at a certain distance for kids, especially the 800. So the 5K or 2 mile, I think it usually takes about 2 to 3 races to figure it out for that season. Now, not for your career, but just to run your best that season. 1,600 meters, likely 3 to 4 races, and you kind of have it figured out for that season. And then the 800-meter, probably 4 to 5 races to get it figured out for that season. Now, each season you also learn a little bit more on how to race and how hard you can push and things like that. But for each season, that's about what it's going to take to maximize your performance at those different races. Okay, so that was just a quick little look through Bill Dellinger's book, and that's just the first part. The big chunk of the book is training plans. I love looking at Prefontaine's 5,000-meter plans from 1972, kind of a day-by-day look at what he did, seeing how they approach things like NCAA's, Olympic trials. I love looking at that. And then I also liked how when you look through these, he uses longer cycles in the preseason. So 21-day cycles early on, and then those shrink to 14, 10, and then I think 7 days by the end of it. So it was a cool look at how Dellinger put together training. I think you see a lot of concepts he used then being used now a lot with multi-pace workouts. I really like mixing 800s and 300s, like alternating those reps. I liked starting off, with like 4 300s, going out into a tempo run, coming back with some more 300s. I love that kind of work. So if you can get your hands on this book, Winning Running by Bill Dellinger, takes you through the Oregon system. If you can get your hand on it, get that book. Want to become a better distance coach? Well, I have something for you. Join the D Troop. Hmm. Want to become a better distance coach? Well, I have something for you. Join the D Crew and get year-round access to the tools, training, and community trusted by hundreds of coaches. And here's what you get: live monthly webinars with leading coaches. We've had coaches that have coached Olympians and Olympic medalists, high school national champions. You also get an on-demand webinar library of 40 plus and growing webinars, access to the lab, a collection of curated coaching resources, tools, and downloads, 4 seasonal training plans, 2 for cross country, 2 for track. And what I mean by that is an in-season and off-season for each of those sports. Training intensity charts, pace calculators, and coaching resources in the toolbox, and exclusive discounts on the coaching distance course, partner products, and more. Join the Deep Crew today. Go dig around at coachingdistance.com.